"Don't lift that box," Mason Cole called out. The old man looked up just as the cardboard carton slid toward the edge of the truck bed. Mason dropped the folder he had been carrying and crossed the wet parking lot in 3 long steps. He caught the box against his shoulder before it fell, then guided it back onto the tailgate. Nothing dramatic, just bad timing, a slick truck bed, and an elderly stranger who had clearly decided asking for help was harder than hurting himself. "You all right?" Mason asked. The man nodded, though one hand stayed pressed against his chest for a second longer than Mason liked. "I had it," he said. "Sure you did." Mason glanced at the half-loaded pickup. 8 large cartons remained on the pavement, their bottoms dark from the rain. Beyond the chain-link fence, forklifts moved between the loading bays of Bennett Regional Logistics. Backup alarms beeped through the cold November air. Mason checked his watch. 4:18. His interview was 12 miles away, and he was supposed to arrive by 4:30. The position came with steady hours, health insurance, and enough money to stop pretending the final notice on his apartment door was just another piece of junk mail. From the passenger seat of his old Ford, his 9-year-old daughter, Sadie, lowered the window. "Dad, we're going to be late." "I know, kiddo." The old man reached for another carton. His fingers slipped under the wet cardboard. Mason looked toward the highway, then back at him. Most people like to believe they would stop. The truth is, kindness becomes harder when the clock is running and your own life is already coming apart. Mason took off his interview jacket, folded it over the truck's side mirror, and rolled up his sleeves. "You hold the door," he told the man. "I'll handle the heavy ones." "I can pay you." "Didn't ask." Sadie climbed out with her hood pulled tight around her face. She began gathering the shipping papers that had blown beneath the truck. "What's your name?" she asked the stranger. "Walter." "I'm Sadie. That's my dad. He fixes things even when we're late." Mason gave her a look. Walter almost smiled. Mason lifted the next carton and stopped. A red strip ran across the top, stamped with the words "Emergency Relief." Beneath it was a lot number, R417. He had worked in freight yards long enough to know those seals were not used on ordinary warehouse transfers. "Where are these headed?" Mason asked. Walter's expression changed. Just a little. "A church storage building." Mason looked at the shipping sheet Sadie was holding. The destination line had been covered with a fresh white label. Under one corner, another address showed through. "This load's wrong," Mason said. Walter went still. Rain tapped against the metal roof of the truck, soft at first, then harder. Mason checked the weight printed on the manifest and counted the cartons again. The numbers did not match. Not even close. "Who gave you this paperwork?" he asked. Walter looked past him toward the bright warehouse doors, where a man in a clean gray coat stood watching them from 50 yards away. "Someone who hoped I wouldn't ask questions," Walter said quietly. Then the old man turned back to Mason. "And that box you just caught was never supposed to be on this truck." Mason studied the man in the gray coat near the warehouse doors, but the stranger turned away before their eyes could meet. A black sedan waited beside him with its engine running. Walter lowered his voice. "We should finish loading." Mason did not move. "Not until I know this truck is safe." He crouched beside the rear tire and checked the vehicle information plate, then compared it with the weight listed on the manifest. Sadie held the papers beneath the weak yellow light over the loading dock. Rainwater ran from the corner of each page. "The front axle is carrying too much," Mason said. "If you take the interstate like this, the steering could get light when you hit 50 miles an hour." Walter looked at the cartons. "Can you fix it?" Mason checked his watch again. 4:23. His phone vibrated in his pocket. He already knew who it was. For a moment, he pictured the hiring manager sitting behind a clean desk, looking toward the lobby and deciding Mason Cole was just another man who could not show up on time. Then Walter's hand began trembling as he reached for the tailgate. Mason took the carton from him. "Yes," he said. "I can fix it." He moved the heavier boxes toward the center of the truck bed and secured them with 2 frayed straps Walter had behind the seat. The work should have taken 20 minutes. It took almost an hour because several labels had been placed over older ones, and Mason refused to stack anything until he understood where the weight belonged. Sadie helped by reading the numbers aloud. R417. R417. This one says R419. Mason stopped. "Read that again." She did. The box was the same size as the others, but nearly twice as heavy. Walter watched him closely. "What do you think is inside?" "Not blankets." Mason pressed his palm against the damp cardboard. Something solid shifted within. But opening it is not my call. His phone rang again. This time he answered. Mason Cole speaking. A woman from the delivery company told him the interview window had closed. He tried to explain, but her voice had already become polite in that distant way people use when the decision is finished. We need drivers who can meet a schedule, she said. I understand. He ended the call before Sadie could see his face change. She saw anyway. Children usually do. Was that the job? She asked. It was. Did you lose it because we stopped? Walter asked. Mason pulled the final strap tight. I made the stop. That part belongs to me. I have always thought that says more about a person than any speech could. Mason did not blame the old man, the rain, or the bad paperwork. He simply carried the cost of his own choice. Walter reached into his coat. Let me pay for your time. Keep it. You do not even know how much I was going to offer. Does not matter. Mason closed the tailgate, then noticed the fuel gauge inside Walter's truck resting below empty. He sighed, took the last $20 bill from his wallet, and handed it to Sadie. Run inside and prepay pump 6. Her eyes widened. Dad, that is our gas money. I know. Walter looked down. You have already done enough. Mason picked up his jacket, now wet along one sleeve. Enough gets people stranded 10 miles from home. Walter said nothing after that. He only watched Mason check every strap one final time. As Sadie returned from the gas station, she glanced toward the warehouse and quietly raised her tablet. The man in the gray coat was speaking into his phone beside an unmarked box truck. She took one picture before he stepped into the sedan. Walter opened the passenger door of Mason's Ford, pretending to steady himself, and slipped a sealed envelope into the glove compartment. Mason did not see him do it. He was looking at the dashboard, where the low fuel light had just come on. Walter noticed it too. Tomorrow, the old man said, someone may come asking about tonight. Mason started the engine. They can ask. Walter rested one hand on the truck door. Be careful who you answer. The next morning, Mason woke to 3 black sport utility vehicles parked along the curb outside his apartment building. Their engines were still running. White exhaust drifted into the cold air and curled past the fire escape like breath. Sadie stood beside the kitchen window in her socks, holding a bowl of cereal she had forgotten to eat. Dad, she said, I think those people are here for us. Mason looked down at the street. A woman stepped from the middle vehicle wearing a dark wool coat, polished black shoes, and the kind of expression that made people straighten their backs before she said a word. 2 men followed her. One carried a leather folder. The other kept scanning the building. Mason had seen that look before in company offices. It meant someone had already decided what happened and only needed him to confirm it. He pulled on his work boots. Stay inside. Sadie set down the bowl. I was there too. That is why you are staying inside. By the time Mason reached the front steps, the woman was waiting beneath the weak porch light. Her blonde hair was pinned back. Her face was tired, but her voice was steady. Mason Cole. Yes. I am Claire Bennett. The name landed harder than she probably expected. Bennett Regional Logistics. The warehouse. The trucks. The man from the night before. Mason glanced at the vehicles again. Walter is your father. Where is he? Claire asked. I dropped him at the truck stop off Route 33. He never made it home. Mason's jaw tightened. Then you should call the police. We did. She opened the leather folder and removed a printed photograph. It showed Mason beside Walter's truck with one hand on a carton marked R417. The angle made it look like he was taking something. One shipment is missing, she said. You were the last person seen with him. Mason stared at the image. That is not what happened. Then tell me what did. Your father was loading a truck that should not have been loaded. The weight was wrong. The paperwork was worse. One of the men stepped closer. Did you remove anything from the vehicle? No, Claire washed his face. Not his coat. Not the cracked porch rail. His face. She was good at that. Did my father give you anything? Mason thought of Walter's gloves, still resting on the passenger floor of his Ford. He left a pair of work gloves. Claire's eyes narrowed. Bring them. Mason turned toward the building, but Sadie had already opened the door. She held the gloves in both hands. The faded initials WB were stitched near the cuff. He forgot these, she said. Claire looked at the child, then back at Mason. Her expression softened for half a second before closing again. Anything else? Sadie shook her head. Mason was about to do the same when he remembered Walter leaning into the passenger side of the Ford. He walked to the truck and opened the glove compartment. A sealed envelope rested on top of his registration papers. His name was written across the front in shaky black ink. Claire saw it. "Open it." Mason broke the seal. Inside was a brass key and a note folded once. He read the words aloud. "Do not trust the report." The man with the leather folder reached for the key, but Mason closed his hand around it. "No," Claire's voice cooled. "That belongs to my family. Your father left it in my truck. My father is missing. And somebody changed those shipping labels." For the first time, Claire looked uncertain. Then her phone rang. She answered without taking her eyes off Mason. A man spoke quickly on the other end. Her face lost color. "What do you mean he left the hospital?" she asked. Mason heard the rest in broken pieces. Walter had checked in before dawn with chest pain. He had refused to stay. He had disappeared less than an hour later. Claire ended the call and looked at the key in Mason's hand. "You are coming with me," she said. Mason glanced toward Sadie. "I am not leaving my daughter." Sadie stepped onto the porch and pulled on her coat. "Then I am coming too." Claire started to object, but Mason held up Walter's note. "You want answers? So do we." Somewhere inside one of the vehicles, a radio crackled. Then Claire's phone lit again with a message from an unknown number. She read it once. Her eyes moved to Mason. "It says, Warehouse 14. Bring the driver." Claire read the message again, then handed the phone to the man carrying the leather folder. "Trace the number." "It may take time," he said. "We do not have time." Mason looked at the brass key in his palm. A small metal tag hung from it, stamped with the number 14. "Your father already told us where to go." Claire opened the rear door of the middle vehicle. "Then get in." Mason shook his head. "I drive." She looked toward his old Ford, its passenger door a different shade of blue from the rest of the truck. "That thing barely has gas. I know the East Side freight roads. Your driver does not." Claire did not like being corrected. Mason could see it in the way her mouth tightened. Still, 2 minutes later, she was sitting in the front passenger seat, while Sadie climbed into the back with Walter's gloves on her lap. The two black vehicles followed them through the gray morning. For the first few miles, nobody spoke. The heater clicked without giving much warmth. A loose quarter rolled inside the cup holder every time Mason turned. Claire stared through the windshield as warehouses and railroad yards passed on both sides. "How long did you work in freight?" she finally asked. 11 years. "Why did you leave?" Mason kept his eyes on the road. "I did not." Claire waited. "I was pushed out." "By Bennett Logistics?" "By a contractor your company still uses." That answer stayed between them. Claire looked down at the note from Walter. "You expect me to believe this is connected to what happened to you. I expect you to look before you decide." Sadie leaned forward slightly. "My dad does not lie." Mason glanced at her in the mirror. "Sadie, he does not." Claire turned toward the back seat. Her voice softened, but only a little. "I am trying to find my father." "So are we," Sadie said. The road narrowed beside an old rail line. Mason slowed near a crossing and listened. A train horn sounded in the distance, 2 long blasts and 1 short. He looked at Claire. "That was in the background of your father's message last night." "You heard a train and a text message?" "In the phone call you mentioned. The one from the unknown number." Claire studied him, surprised that he had remembered. Warehouse 14 stood behind a rusted chain-link gate half a mile ahead. The Bennett logo had been removed from the building, but its pale outline remained on the brick. One side of the gate was open. No guard. No delivery schedule posted. Mason drove inside and stopped beside Walter's pickup. The truck was empty. Its driver's door hung open, and the keys were gone. Claire stepped out before the engine had fully stopped. "Dad." Her voice carried across the yard and disappeared beneath the low hum of power lines. Mason walked around the truck. Walter's coat was folded on the seat. His reading glasses rested on the dashboard. "He did not leave by choice," Claire said. "Maybe," Mason replied. "But someone wanted us to think that." He pointed to the wet gravel. Fresh tire marks curved toward the rear loading bay. Sadie stayed close to him as they followed them. Near the warehouse door, she bent down and picked up a strip of red plastic. "This is like the one from last night." Mason took it carefully. R417 was printed along the side. The brass key opened the service entrance. Inside, the warehouse smelled of coal dust, cardboard, and diesel fuel. Rows of empty shelves disappeared into the dim light. Claire checked her phone. "There is no record of this building being active." "Then someone forgot to tell the forklift," Mason said. A backup alarm sounded somewhere beyond the far wall. Claire moved forward, but he raised one hand. Slow down. My father could be in there. And whoever sent that message knows we are here. A voice came from behind them. Smooth. Calm. Almost friendly. Claire, you should have called before visiting an unsafe property. A man in a charcoal overcoat stood inside the open doorway with 2 security employees. Mason recognized him immediately. He was the man who had watched them from 50 yards away the night before. Claire's shoulders stiffened. Derek Shaw. Derek gave her a concerned smile. We have been looking everywhere for your father. His eyes moved to Mason, then to the red seal in his hand. But I see you found the driver. Derek stepped farther into the warehouse as if he owned every inch of the floor. Maybe he believed he did. His shoes stayed clean even on the dusty concrete, and his voice had the calm tone of a man used to explaining problems he had created. Claire, this building was taken out of service months ago, he said. There is nothing here worth risking your safety over. Claire held up the red seal. Then why is this fresh? Derek glanced at it for less than a second. Old inventory gets moved. Labels get missed. That is not unusual. Mason looked past him toward the far loading bay. The forklift alarm had stopped, but the air still carried the smell of warm diesel. Someone had been working there recently. The floor tracks are wet, Mason said. A forklift came through after the rain started. Derek gave him a thin smile. And you are? The driver your people photographed last night. Right. Derek turned back to Claire. That explains the confusion. This man was seen handling restricted freight near your father's truck. Sadie moved closer to Mason. He felt her fingers curl around the back of his jacket. Claire noticed. He was helping my father, she said. It was not trust. Not yet. But it was the first time she had spoken for him. Derek's smile did not change. That is what he says. One of the security employees opened a tablet and showed Claire a report. According to the screen, the missing relief shipment had been signed out under a temporary driver identification number. Mason's name appeared beneath it. That is not my signature, Mason said. It is your identification number, Derek replied. I have never driven for Bennett. You worked for one of our contractors. 3 years ago. Claire looked at Mason. Could they still have your information? They should not. But they could. He hated that answer because it was true. Derek spread his hands. This is exactly why we should let security handle it. Your father may have discovered an old paperwork issue and overreacted. He has not been well. Claire's face hardened. Do not use his health to dismiss him. I am trying to protect him. And you. There it was. The soft language people use when they want control to sound like concern. Mason had heard it in offices before. I think most people have. The cruelest decisions rarely arrive with shouting. They usually come in a clean folder with someone saying it is for everyone's benefit. Sadie tugged Mason's sleeve and whispered, Dad, look. She pointed toward a dark glass office overlooking the warehouse floor. The reflection showed part of the loading area behind them. In the glass, an unmarked box truck sat near a side door. Several cartons marked R417 were stacked beside it. Mason turned. From where they stood, the cartons were hidden behind a row of empty shelving. Claire, he said quietly, walk 10 feet to your left. Derek stepped between them. There is no reason to wander through an unsecured facility. Claire did not look at him. She moved left. The hidden cartons came into view. Her breathing changed. Just once. Those were reported delivered 3 weeks ago, she said. Derek checked the tablet. Then these are duplicates. Mason picked up a loose shipping sheet from the nearest pallet. The destination listed a non-profit center outside Dayton, but the carrier code belonged to a private resale company. Relief goods do not go to liquidators, he said. Claire took out her phone and opened the company system. Her thumb moved quickly across the screen. The official record shows these units were received by 12 churches and 2 county shelters. Then the record is false, Mason said. A metal door slammed somewhere deeper inside the building. Sadie raised her tablet. I took a picture last night, she said. There was another truck. She opened the image and held it toward Claire. In the reflection behind Walter's pickup, a man in a Bennett security jacket was accepting a folder from Walter. Claire zoomed in. Her eyes lifted slowly toward the security chief standing beside Derek. That is you, she said. The man went pale. Derek did not. He only sighed, as if everyone else had made the morning more complicated than necessary. Claire, he said, you are looking at one image without context. Then a weak voice came through the warehouse intercom above them. The context, Walters said, is that Derek has been lying to you for months. Walter's voice crackled through the old speakers, thin but steady. Claire looked up toward the dark office above the warehouse floor. Dad, a light came on behind the glass. Walter stood beside the intercom panel with one hand resting on the desk. He looked pale, but he was upright. I am all right, he said. For now. Claire moved toward the stairs, but Derek raised a hand. Before anyone overreacts, Walter entered a restricted building without clearance. My team found him confused and brought him somewhere safe. Walter gave a tired laugh through the speaker. Safe people do not lock the door from the outside. Every face turned toward the security chief. He looked at Derek. Derek did not look back. Open the office, Claire said. The man hesitated. That was enough. Claire's voice changed. It lost the softness she had used with her father and became the voice of the woman whose name was on every truck outside. Now, the security chief crossed the floor and unlocked the stairwell door. Walter came down slowly. Claire met him at the bottom step and took his arm. You left the hospital. They wanted me to rest. You should have listened. I have been listening for 6 months. That is how I learned no one was listening to me. Derek stepped closer. Walter, you have been under a great deal of stress. We can discuss your concerns privately. That is where you prefer every concern, is it not? Walter asked. Private, quiet, easy to file away. Mason watched Derek's expression. The man still looked calm, but the calm had become too careful. Walter pointed toward the hidden cartons. I gave your security chief copies of the original shipping records last night. He told me he would bring them to Claire. Claire looked at the man. Did you? I was going to. Where are they? He glanced toward Derek again. This time everyone saw it. Derek exhaled and stepped forward as though he were rescuing a meeting from poor management. The documents were incomplete. I asked him to verify them before alarming the board. You asked me to destroy them, the security chief said quietly. The warehouse seemed to shrink around those words. Derek turned to him. Be very careful. I am tired of being careful. The man reached into his coat and handed Claire a small flash drive. The files are here. Claire closed her fingers around it, but Derek immediately pointed toward Mason. And we are accepting this confession because a former contract employee walked in carrying stolen access keys? Mason's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. His delivery company had ended his contract, effective immediately. A second message followed from the finance office. His truck was scheduled for repossession that afternoon. Sadie saw his face. What happened? Nothing you need to worry about. That means something bad happened. Mason put the phone away. Claire looked from him to Derek. Did you contact his employer? I informed them of a security concern. That is standard procedure. Before an investigation, we protect the company first. Mason gave a small nod. There it is. Claire looked at him. What? The report before the person. Derek's voice sharpened. You are not in a position to lecture anyone. I am not lecturing. Mason held up the red seal. I am telling you this label came off a shipment your system says reached families 3 weeks ago. Those boxes are still here. Somebody changed the destination, used my old identification, and made sure I was standing close enough to blame. Walter took a slow breath. He is right. Derek shook his head with practiced disappointment. This is turning into theater. Then 2 warehouse employees hurried through the rear door. Between them was Walter's missing medical bag. One of them said they had found it inside a locked storage room, along with several blank shipping forms bearing Mason's old driver number. For the first time, Derek's composure slipped. Only slightly. Then he recovered and pointed toward the security chief. You see? He had access. He acted alone. The man stared at him. You told me to use Mason Cole because no one would defend him. Claire looked at Mason. He did not look triumphant. He looked tired. That was the part she would remember later. A man had just been handed proof that powerful people had tried to ruin him, and his first concern was still his daughter standing beside him in a cold warehouse. Walter reached for Claire's arm. The board meets at noon, he said. Derek knows the sale can erase the audit trail. Derek smiled again, but now it looked forced. The board will hear the full story. Good, Claire said. She held up the flash drive. So will I. A siren sounded outside. Not police. A tow truck. Through the open bay door, Mason saw it stop beside his Ford. Sadie whispered, Dad, they are taking our truck. Mason closed his eyes for 1 second. Claire turned toward him. I can stop that. He looked at her. Can you? She understood what he meant. not the tow truck. The choice she had made when she believed the report before she believed him. Mason watched the tow operator fasten the last chain beneath the Ford. The old truck gave a small groan as its front wheels lifted from the wet pavement. Sadie stood beside him with Walter's gloves pressed against her coat. "Where are we supposed to go?" she asked. Mason kept his voice even. "We will figure it out." Claire came through the loading bay with her phone in one hand. "I told the finance company to stop the repossession." The driver shook his head. "Order already cleared, ma'am. I need written release from the lender." Claire started typing. Mason did not thank her. He did not argue either. He simply watched the truck that had carried groceries, school projects, and everything they owned during the move after his wife died roll toward the gate. "The files on the flash drive are incomplete," Claire said. "Derek's team deleted the security footage." Mason looked at her. "Then your board will call this a paperwork mistake. Unless we recover the original video. You had people, reports, and authority. I had a wet shipping sheet. You still trusted him." Claire lowered her phone. "I know. Do you?" His words were quiet, which made them harder to avoid. "Because my daughter just watched our only vehicle get taken over something your company started before I ever walked into that parking lot." Claire had no answer ready. For once, she did not try to make one. Mason took Sadie's hand and started toward the road. Walter called after him, but Mason kept walking. Pride can look a lot like strength from a distance. Up close, it is often just a tired person trying not to need anybody. Sadie looked down at the envelope still tucked beneath Walter's gloves. The paper had softened from being carried all morning. She rubbed one corner with her thumb and felt something stiff inside. "Dad, wait." Mason stopped. She pulled at the seam. A second, thinner sheet slid from between the layers. Walter's handwriting covered one side, along with a web address and a string of numbers. Claire hurried over. Walter adjusted his glasses and stared at the page. "I forgot about that." "What is it?" Sadie asked. "A private camera system," he said. "I installed it after 2 relief shipments disappeared. It does not connect to the company network." Claire looked at him. "Why did you hide this from me?" Walter's face fell. "Because every time I brought you a concern, Derek brought you a cleaner report." That hurt her. Mason could see it. Claire opened the address on her phone and entered the code. 4 camera feeds appeared. One showed Derek directing workers to replace labels on the relief cartons. Another showed the security chief locking Walter inside the upstairs office. A third showed blank forms being stamped with Mason's old identification number. The final feed carried a red warning across the screen. "Remote deletion scheduled for 12 p.m. Claire checked the time. 10:07. "The board meeting begins at noon," she said. "Once the sale is signed, the servers transfer to the buyer. Derek can erase the backup and call everything here unauthorized." Mason stared at the video. "Save it. The download is blocked. It has to be released from the main terminal at the active distribution center." Walter pointed toward the unmarked truck visible on the feed. "That terminal is wherever they move the shipment." Claire turned to Mason. This time there was no order in her voice. "I was wrong about you." He said nothing. "I trusted a report because it was easier than admitting I had stopped seeing what was happening inside my own company." She took a breath. "I need your help finding that truck." Mason looked at Sadie, then at the road where his Ford had disappeared. "You do not need me. You need someone who understands your freight system. That is you." "Not anymore." Sadie held up the photograph on her tablet. "Maybe it still is." She zoomed in on the unmarked truck. A small inspection sticker showed on the rear window. Mason studied the number, then looked toward the railroad tracks. "That truck was serviced at the East Terminal," he said. Claire checked the time again. "Can we reach it before noon?" Mason took Walter's gloves from Sadie and pulled them on. "Only if we leave now." Walter handed Claire the keys to the small pickup from the night before. "Take mine," he said. "The tank is full." Claire looked at him. "You are going back to the hospital. After this?" "No. Now." Walter opened his mouth to argue, but Mason stepped between them. "She is right." Walter gave him a tired look. "You sound like my daughter. That should worry you." Sadie almost smiled. Claire called one of the black vehicles over and told the driver to take Walter to Riverside Medical Center. Then she climbed into the passenger seat of the pickup while Mason took the wheel. Sadie sat between them, holding the tablet on her knees. The cab smelled like coffee, old leather, and the peppermint candy Walter kept in the cup holder. Mason pulled onto the service road at 10:19. "The East Terminal is 28 miles from here," Claire said. The highway will be faster. Not this time of day. He turned beneath the railroad overpass and headed toward a narrow county road lined with bare trees and storage yards. The truck in Sadie's picture has a temporary inspection sticker from the East Terminal, Mason said. But the weight on that load means they cannot take the old bridge on Route 40. They will have to use the industrial loop. Claire checked the company tracking system. The vehicle identification number is not active because they changed the plate, not the truck. Sadie zoomed in on the picture again. There is a dent near the left light. Mason nodded. Good eye. At 10:47, they reached the industrial loop. Rain streaked across the windshield, and the wipers dragged with every pass. 3 box trucks moved ahead of them, all white, all unmarked. Claire leaned forward. Which one? Mason watched the way each vehicle sat on its suspension. The second truck is riding low in the rear. Too much weight behind the axle. That is our load. Can you stop it? Not safely. He called the state transportation office and gave them the truck's location, the inspection sticker, and the suspected weight violation. Claire called federal investigators and sent the video files Walter had recovered. Nobody shouted. Nobody swerved across lanes. They followed from a distance while the officials moved into place ahead. Sometimes doing the right thing is not dramatic. It is knowing when not to make a bad situation worse. The second truck exited toward the Bennett East Distribution Center, where 2 transportation officers were already waiting beside the gate. The driver pulled over. Within minutes, investigators began checking the cargo. Claire's phone rang. They found the relief labels, she said, and the original county delivery lists. Mason kept watching the other 2 trucks. One continued toward the interstate. The third turned into the terminal. We are not done, he said. Why? That first truck is sitting too high. Empty, or almost empty. It was probably the decoy. The third one has the right weight, but it entered through an employee gate. Claire opened the live terminal map. The main server room is inside that building. The dashboard clock read 11:18. They had 42 minutes. Claire called the terminal manager. No answer. She tried again. Straight to voicemail. Mason parked near the employee entrance. The brass key Walter had left in his glove compartment fit the side door. Inside, the building was warm and nearly silent. Most of the workers had been sent to an early lunch meeting across the property. Derek had cleared the place. Sadie stayed beside Claire as Mason followed the sound of a cooling fan down a narrow hallway. They reached the server room at 11:31. A red message flashed across the main screen. Remote deletion armed. Mason studied the freight software, then pointed to a smaller terminal beside the loading schedule. That system controls shipment releases. The backup is tied to the same route file. Claire entered her executive credentials. Access denied. Derek removed my permissions. Sadie held up the paper from Walter's envelope. What about this number? Claire typed the private code. The screen changed. Camera files began copying to an external archive, but the progress bar moved slowly. 12%. 18. 26. Then an alarm sounded from the loading floor. A voice came over the speaker. Claire, the board meeting has been moved up. Derek sounded almost cheerful. You have 10 minutes. The copy reached 31% and stopped. Mason looked at the frozen screen. He cut the connection. Claire stared toward the loading bays. Can you restore it? Mason pulled on Walter's old gloves and opened the lower panel beneath the terminal. I can try. Mason removed the lower panel and found a loose network cable hanging behind the terminal. Derek did not cut the whole system, he said. He only disconnected this station. Claire knelt beside him, holding her phone flashlight steady while Sadie watched the progress screen. Mason pushed the cable back into place. The bar jumped from 31% to 47. Then 62. The loading floor speaker clicked on again. Claire, Derek said, the board is waiting. She looked toward the ceiling. Let them wait. The copy reached 100% at 11:44. Claire sent the archive to the federal investigators, the company's outside counsel, and every board member before Derek could remove another permission. Minutes later, they joined the emergency meeting through the terminal camera. Derek stood in the main boardroom 28 miles away, speaking beneath the Bennett Company seal as though nothing had happened. The missing relief inventory appears to be the work of a former contract driver, he said. We have identified Mason Cole as the likely source of the fraud. Claire stepped into view. Then you should explain why your voice is on the warehouse recordings. The room went quiet. She played the footage of Derek ordering workers to replace labels, use Mason's old identification number, and move the relief cartons to a private reseller. Walter appeared on the screen from his hospital room. The security chief confirmed the original shipping records. Investigators reported that both trucks had been stopped and every missing carton had been recovered. Derek tried to call it a misunderstanding, then an efficiency problem, then an unauthorized operation carried out below his level. Each explanation lasted less time than the one before it. By noon, the sale had been suspended, Derek had been removed from his position, and a full investigation had begun. Mason did not smile. He stood beside Sadie and asked one question. When will those supplies reach the families they were meant for? Claire looked at him for a long moment. Tonight. 3 weeks later, the first snow fell over Columbus. Mason's truck had been returned, his contract record had been cleared, and every employee punished for reporting missing relief goods had been offered reinstatement. Claire asked Mason to become the company's director of freight compliance. He did not accept right away. I have conditions, he said. Claire almost smiled. I expected that. Mason asked for public tracking on relief shipments, outside audits, and a training program for single parents trying to return to transportation work. He also asked that his name stay out of the company's advertising. This was never about making me look good, he said. It was about making sure people got what was promised. Claire agreed to every condition. Months later, Sadie sat at a small desk near the loading office, finishing her homework while Mason checked the last winter shipment. Walter rested in a chair by the heater, wearing the same old coat. Claire arrived carrying 3 cups of hot chocolate. She picked up a carton and looked at Mason. Where does this one go? He handed her the worn gloves marked WB. You hold the truck door, he said. We will handle the heavy part together. That is how real change usually begins. Not with a grand speech or a perfect person, but with someone choosing to stop when it would be easier to keep driving. Most of us will never uncover a company scandal or stand before a boardroom. But every day, we pass people carrying something too heavy alone. Sometimes the best thing we can do is notice, set down our own hurry for a moment, and help them lift it.